greet you on behalf of the Office of the General Minister and President of the Christian Church Disciples of Christ in the United States and Canada. Friends, we're live tonight in the Christian Church in Arizona. Can you just put your hands together for yourselves? This is an amazing group, and we're streaming live tonight. So I want to begin actually by asking you a question. Churches where, you finish the sentence, churches where what? What happens? Worship. Churches where we worship. What else happens? Churches where we do mission. We do fellowship. What else happens? Churches where, say it louder. Lives are transformed. What else? We praise God. Justice. Community. What else? Miracles. You feel loved. This is a thoughtful group. Support. Okay. What about eating? Do you eat? We eat, we sing. Anything else? God, really? God shows up. All right. Transformation. Anything else? Become Wow. We have fun. Yes. Friendship. Amazing. I like to say churches where we tell the truth. We don't always. But these are ways of trying to tell the truth. And this project, right? The Church Narrative Project, our shared goal, right, of a narrative of a shared future, our telling the truth helps us take those steps to do that. And a part of that is the story hour that we're going to begin with. But before we do that, we're going to hear from some really important leaders. That's really all of you. We can't hear from all of you. But first, we're going to hear from, can we thank Foothills Christian Church for hosting? What a gorgeous, amazing campus. Pastor Rebecca Crevens is going to come and greet us right now.
Good evening. I'm Becca, and I'm the senior pastor of this congregation, and it's a joy for us to host finally a regional event. I've been here 8 years, and I don't know if we've hosted one women's regional event, but because we're in the very far northern, I guess, region of our region. But welcome to our church. If you need the restroom, there are restrooms in this building just down the door, outside the door over here. Many of you were here for dinner. From what I know, I think we're going to mainly be gathering in our sanctuary, but also back in our fellowship hall. So if you come back tomorrow, you might be directed into that building instead. But thank you so much for allowing us to share this space, and it's great to see so many familiar and also new faces.
Our greetings next will come from your very own regional minister, the Reverend Dr. J. Hartley. Yeah.
Friends, it's a thrill to be gathered with all of you tonight. Thank you for coming. Those of you that made it from Tucson, give yourselves a cheer. All right, people that drove up today for that, we're happy to have you here. We are happy to have a regional event at Foothills, and I think we'll do it again because Foothills is being an amazing host for us this weekend. So thank you, Foothills. Thanks for being here.
We know that the Christian Church in Arizona could host and do all kinds of things. And we don't take it for granted that you said yes, and your regional minister said yes to hosting and to taking these steps amidst, I think you've had something like 3 regional events around the same time. And so we're so grateful that you would take time. Indeed, want to thank our regional colleague, Reverend J. Hartley. I love that he will give me the description of each of you because you're so special. And has told me at length about this marvelous region, and it just is so thoughtful. And so I'm so grateful that we can begin together with him and with all of you. I want to also acknowledge a few other regional colleagues. Reverend Richie Sanchez from the Pacific Southwest is in the house tonight. He came here because he knows how awesome Arizona is. And then the Reverend Joanne Bell Haynes is from the Central Rocky Mountain region. Will you say hello to her as well? We're so thrilled. So friends, I want to, our General Minister and President, Terri Hord Owens, sends her love and her greetings and gratitude. She actually is literally just like touched down about 7 hours ago from the Middle East, where she went on a trip with Global Ministries. It pained her to not be here because, in fact, she's made a commitment to be at every one. But this isn't a one and done. So she gets to come back next time. Amen. Excited about that. So I just want to go over ground rules, okay? There's two. It's a Friday evening. I'm mindful you've worked or not worked, and you've done some things this week, and it is 6 o'clock our mountain time here. It's 9 o'clock Eastern. We may be tired, but I want to, our rule is to try to be as present as possible, right? Try to have ears to hear, eyes to see, take in these storytellers that have worked hard with the coach, Lindsey Braun, over the last 6 weeks, 4 weeks. So can we say yes to being present as possible in person and online? We're going to be present. And so then the second rule is, it's a rule, is that these folks, they're sharing themselves, they're being vulnerable, they're sharing their lives with you. And so whether you like them or you don't like them, I want you to cheer. And I want you to cheer loud. I want you to cheer loud, right? So when I say their name, right? When I say the name, and they begin to get up, I want you to clap, right? So start clapping. All right. Okay. So then there's an inflection point. Okay. They start getting up and walking to the microphone. You clap, and then the inflection point is when they get in front of the mic. I need you to clap like you forgot you were at Foothills Christian Church. And whatever your favorite band is, the thing that just gives you, like you've lost your mind, can you just erupt? You got to practice, all right? So I'm going to walk, and then when I get here, all right? My God. It seems like the instructions were clear, and we're all on the same page, and we have practiced sufficiently. So friends, your first storyteller of the evening is Doug Bland. He is pastor at Community Christian Church in Tempe, and he actually played the tuba in junior high school. Put your hands together for Reverend Doug Bland.
We could get used to this. We should do it every Sunday in church. The Merrimack River in southern Missouri at one time used to be the most polluted river in the state. 200 years of lead mining was toxic to fish and wildlife and people. But there were some people who were willing to rock the boat, who stood up against corporate polluters and cleaned up the river. So in the late 90s, when I took a group of high school kids to the Merrimack River for a canoeing trip, the river was beautiful. And the outing was just so much fun that I came back from that trip jacked to buy a canoe. Now, there was a problem. In order for me to buy a canoe, I knew that I needed to sell a canoe to my family. That is the idea of a canoe to my family. And I decided I'd start with the lowest hanging fruit. Adam was only 7, but he had this adventuresome spirit. And I figured, if I could get him enthusiastic about buying a canoe, then maybe that would be contagious to the rest of my family. So I co-opted Adam, and we took off from Kansas City down near Branson, Missouri, where the Merrimack River is in southern Missouri, and we rented a canoe and we headed out in the water. And it was a perfect day for canoeing. The sun was shining, the breeze was gentle and rippling the water, so it made it look like there were a billion diamonds on the surface of the water. The birds were flying overhead, the fish were jumping. Adam's in the front of the canoe, the bow, I'm in the stern, I'm steering and paddling. And at one point, after a few strokes, I say to Adam, "So Adam, what do you think? Isn't canoeing great?" Well, even from the back of the canoe, when all I could see was the back, I could tell he was not happy. His head is down, his shoulders are slumped. He's got the paddle of the canoe resting on the gunnels, and his arms are crossed like this. And he says, "No, this is boring. Let's go home." And I thought, oh my God, if I can't even convince Adam, how am I going to convince anybody else? And so I'm really deflated. Well, we go around a bend in the Merrimack River, and all of a sudden the calm waters are gone. And instead there's churning white water. And there are rocks and roots that are reaching up from underneath the stream to tear at the bottom of the canoe. And there are branches over the surface of the water. They're clawing the surface of the water. And we zig when we should have zagged, and the canoe tips over. Adam and I fall out. All of our stuff falls out. It's floating down the river. And I think, oh, my first thought was, if we drowned in this river today, his mother is going to kill us tonight. So I try to swim over towards Adam, but the current is too strong. I'm like a little toy being tossed around by the wave, and I see him disappear into the trough. "Adam, are you okay? Adam, hang in there, buddy." He doesn't say anything. I see him disappear beneath the wave, and he goes down 1, 2, 3 seconds. I wonder, is he going to come back up? But he finally does. He pops up, and his eyes are this big, but he's got this big smile on his face. And he says, "Yeah, this is great. When can we buy a canoe?" Well, I've thought about that often, especially since I've retired from being a pastor at a church. When I retired from Community Christian Church, we had a party, and people wrote letters and cards and congratulated me on a successful ministry. And we ate cookies and drank tea together, and these were salt of the earth people that I just loved. But I'm always looking to see who's not at the table, who's not at the party. And the people that were missing, some of them were people like Adam. People who had this adventuresome spirit. He's among the nuns now, the fastest growing group of religion in the country, who just don't have much to do with the church. And I wondered, if we had provided more of a sense of adventure, the way faith is supposed to be, maybe we could have kept Adam and some of his peers who don't enter churches these days. As far as I remember, nobody ever gave away half of what they had to the poor after one of my sermons. Nobody ever quit their corporate job and joined the Peace Corps or went into the mission field after one of my sermons. So, did we challenge people enough to enter into the adventure? Every time I think about Adam canoed and canoeless, I think about Peter out in the boat in the middle of the storm, hanging on for dear life. The storm is powerful, and he's scared, and he's white knuckling it. But he knows that if he just stays low, if he sits in the boat, he can ride out the storm. But then he sees through the storm, through the wave, through the cloud, through the lightning, he sees this figure walking across the water. And he thinks it's a ghost at first. And then there's something familiar and compelling about the figure. So he calls out, "Lord, is that you?" No answer. "Lord, if it's you, tell me to come." And he hears a call, "Come." So Peter, in the middle of the storm, in the middle of the boat, stands up, which is not a good idea if you don't want to rock the boat. And then he hears the voice, come. And Peter lifts up his right foot and puts it on the gunwale of the boat, which is not a good idea if you don't want to rock the boat. Come, says Jesus. And Peter takes this flying leap onto the waves. And according to the gospel account, no one heard him say, this is boring, let's go home. Instead, what he said was, Theo, Hios, I. Now, I was never very good at Greek in seminary, but if I was to translate that, it means, surely you are the Son of God. But I think what Peter was really, really saying in his heart of hearts, Theo, Eos, I, was, this is great. When can we buy a canoe?
One more time for Doug Bland. I thought, aha, when I learned that we choose our minister as a church when I was in my late adolescence. Someone else said, I thought, aha, when I saw women leading at the highest levels of the church, using their God-given talents to the fullest. There are other prompts. We can collect them. Just raise them in the air, and we'll come around and get your story prompts. Good stuff. Friends, your next storyteller is Lucretia Free. She is the moderator. She is a member of Saguaro Christian Church in Tucson. And in fact, she is an avid and very skilled tennis player that has somehow fallen in love with pickleball. Give us your energy, Lucretia Free.
Good evening. The smile was frozen on my face. You know that kind of smile that you hold just a little too long, so long that your cheek and your lip muscles quiver with the tension? This was my first day at cheerleading practice, and we were told to be perky and pleasant. And so I was. In junior high, I wanted to be a cheerleader more than anything else. In our small rural Ohio town, football and basketball on Friday nights were literally the only game in town. The whole community would show up to support our Xenia Buccaneers. And the guys that played those games, they were strong and they were tall and they were popular. Too often back then, and I suppose even now, a girl's status is a little too closely tied to the guy whose hand she holds while she's walking down the hallway to class. But my school experience was nothing like that. I was a free agent. But I understood enough to know that those football players were well out of my reach. But cheerleading was a possibility because of a once-in-a-lifetime change. You see, recently the coaches had decided to expand the number of cheerleaders to 2 separate squads, one squad for football and one squad for basketball. This presented a rare and wondrously unexpected opportunity, and I intended to take full advantage of it. We had practice every day after school for 2 weeks. Earlier that summer, I had seen Olga Korbut at the 1972 Munich Olympics. I was inspired by her graceful and lithe body. She was petite, but her muscles were so strong. Oh, how I longed to be her. So I pushed back the furniture in our oblong living room and created a working gym. I started at one end and I would go into a running handstand and then twist myself into a back bend and then end with a couple of somersaults and then conclude with that very familiar stance that gymnasts have, you know, the one where their heels are together and the back is severely arched and the arms are outstretched. I had a very vivid imagination. I also imagined myself walking from that stance to collect my medals at the podium, while the crowd roared, of course. The only problem was I wasn't petite and short with muscular legs, and my legs were what they called broomsticks. I didn't have long blonde hair either, although back then I would have traded my dark, tightly curled kinks for blonde hair any day of the week. One day when I spoke with a trainer about being a gymnast, she stood back and assessed my frame and scrunched her nose and unapologetically declared, "You are too tall to be a gymnast." And that was that. So cheerleading provided an opportunity to grab back a little bit of what I had lost, and I could gain something too. Our class had never had a black cheerleader, so the stakes were really high. This would be precedent setting if I made the squad. So I studied and practiced the calculated movements of the current cheerleaders and imitated them as often as I could while I crafted my own unique routine. I longed to be petite like the other girls, but by then I was already taller than most of the boys. In fact, I was even relegated to the back with a couple of other girls to the back row during class photo time so we could ensure the faces of the shorter kids were actually seen in class photos. On the day of the actual tryouts, well-wishers were coming up to me and sending good thoughts and positive vibes my way. Somebody even gave me a piece of string that was colored with our school colors, and they stuck it on my finger for good luck. There was a kind of electricity and anticipation in the air. While my deficiencies were painfully obvious, one asset that I thought that I had going for me was my smile. People had always commented on it. I had a broad, warm smile that made my eyes turn into thin slits. So I stood at the ready position, hands on hips, and waited for my name to be called. While there, I thought about the old story of mighty Casey at bat. He was looking to overcome obstacles and make the people of Mudville proud. And I was trying to do the same thing too in my community. As I approached the stage, I looked down and saw the shiny maple floor. Overhead, the massive lights were encased in metal and hung menacingly above and reflected brightly off the floor, even though it was still daylight outside. The other girls sat in clusters, as is customary for junior high girls. The existing cheerleaders had their own cluster, and of course, they were shoo-ins for making the squad. There had to be at least 30 of us trying out that day, far more than the number of slots that were available. I pretty much sat by myself, having no particular clique to associate with, but I was still representing. I was representing my rural community. I was representing tall girls who were told they weren't petite enough. I was representing aspiring gymnasts who were told they weren't good enough. I was representing Black girls who were told they weren't pretty enough. So there I stood, beaming at the panel of judges, teachers who were chosen, I assume, for their expertise in determining what it takes to be a cheerleader. They judged straight legs and pointed toes, height of jump, voice projection, and enthusiasm. So I smiled, I shouted, I jumped, I stretched, I contorted my body the best I knew how, given its willowy and awkward limitations. When it was over, the girls returned to their clusters, chattering excitedly in hushed tones with gleeful but tense anticipation. The teacher began announcing the names one by one. As each name was read, the new cheerleader bounced over to one side of the gym. First, there was a surprised yelp, and then, oh, what glorious, triumphant joy. Then I saw their faces settle into the confident assurance of knowing that, at least for now, this part of the journey was over for them. I mean, there's nothing like being a winner. I imagined in that moment for those girls that the sky outside was just a little bluer and the bird song just a little sweeter and the world just a bit more beautiful for them than it was for the rest of us. My name was not called. But even all these years later, I think of that day because that's the day that I began my vacillating and tenuous journey of accepting who I am, fully and knowing that I am enough. Lanky legs, dark skin, kinky hair, uncoordinated me, and all of my imperfections. Throughout my life, I have had to learn that lesson again and again and again. But my situation was not at all like that of mighty Casey and the weight of gloomy disappointment in Mudville. My eyes were sore and puffy from a night of tears. Lying in bed, I squinted as I looked up to see the sun rising. I suddenly thought of something that I had heard my parents say since I was small, usually in times of trouble when friends were over or when they were talking to my older sisters. I was still clutching the sheets tightly to my chin when I understood what it meant when they had said that the promise of hope and possibility begins anew at morning. Thank you.
True stories change lives. What a marvelous adventure so far. Would you agree? I thought, aha, when I hate early mornings, like really, really hate early mornings. So when I went to an Audubon National meeting with an ornithology class, we were told we had to show up in a heavily wooded area at 4:30 a.m. to prepare to see the migrating warblers. I was not a very happy camper until, as the sun began to slightly rise, there was a sound of the rustle of wings, and then a chatter began. Suddenly, flashes of golden yellow began to fill the trees, and a peace overcame me, and I realized the moment was sacred. My aha moment was that 4:30 a.m. wasn't necessarily an ungodly hour. Beauty shows up even in my rumbling and grumping. Friend, your next storyteller is a member of Foothills Christian Church. Apparently, he delivered newspapers in Tucson when he was in junior high school. Put your hands together for James Gahn Sr.
I grew up in my grandmother's house at 33 Tyler Avenue in Highland Park, Michigan, a 1 square mile city within the city of Detroit. Tyler Avenue was like any other street in Highland Park. The families were typical for the mid-60s, with dad working for Ford, Chrysler, or General Motors, and mom at home taking care of the house and the kids. We were neighbors of different races, colors, and creeds, and we looked out for each other. If any kid did or said something out of line, the news reached home before you got there. We respected other people's property, helped wherever we could, and lived a pretty good life. I was 11 years old in July 1967. My older brother Bill turned 13 on the 13th, and in August I would be 12. The days were hot, in the mid to upper 80s with humidity well over 50%. In the early morning hours of Sunday, July 23rd, our relative calm was shattered when the Detroit Police Department raided an unlicensed after-hours bar in a predominantly black neighborhood, precipitating 5 days of rioting throughout the city. Governor George Romney called up the National Guard to assist local law enforcement. My parents decided that my mom and we 9 kids should go to our Aunt Jo and Uncle Charlie's farm in Wixom. My dad and Mr. Spencer, our next door neighbor, took turns guarding our 2 houses during the worst of the riots. After snipers shot firefighters responding to structure fires, the governor requested that President Johnson send in the Army to help restore the peace. Soldiers from the 82nd and 101st Airborne Division descended upon the city. With a fragile peace restored, the fighting ended and we returned home. My next door neighbor, David Spencer, and I went to my school gym to play basketball. There we met soldiers from the 101st Airborne Division, the legendary Screaming Eagles. We were wide-eyed to find these heroes in our gymnasium. These were soldiers who, even though just a few years older than us, were not boys, but men, some who would soon be in Vietnam and not survive. As July became August and a sense of tranquility returned, life went back to normal. Spring training wrapped up at the end of March 1968, and the Tigers headed back to Michigan, still stinging from losing the American League title to Baltimore by one game in 1967. I was in the 7th grade. As a member of the Detroit Tigers dugout club, I was looking forward to a great year for the Tigers, and maybe I would get picked to be a bat boy at a game. Opening day was scheduled for Tuesday, April 9th. Thursday, April 4th, 1968 was just another school day for me. At 6:05 p.m. Eastern Time, far away in Memphis, Tennessee, James Earl Ray shot and killed the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. After all the riots across the country during the long, hot summer of 1967, the nation held its breath, hoping and praying that cooler heads would prevail. Unfortunately, news of Dr. King's assassination prompted new outbreaks of racial violence, resulting in more than 40 deaths nationwide and extensive property damage in over 100 American cities, including Detroit, Chicago, New York, and Washington, D.C. The riots continued until almost the end of May. Opening day was postponed one day because of Dr. King's funeral. On April 10th, the Detroit Tigers lost the first game of the season, but won the next 9 in a row. On June 4th, after the first 50 games of the season, the Tigers are 31-19. We're number 1 in the American League, fans, and things are looking up for Detroit. On June 5th, while campaigning for the Democratic nomination for president, U.S. Senator Robert F. Kennedy was shot and died the next day from his wounds. Less than 5 years after his brother, President John F. Kennedy, was assassinated in Dallas, Senator Kennedy's death was a huge blow to the Democratic Party in general and to my family in particular. Like most Irish Catholic families of the time, we felt connected to the Kennedys and shared in their grief. Today is July 8th, and in sports, things are looking great for the Tigers. On All-Star Day, we're leading the league with a .658 record of 54-28. I was still hoping to be selected to be a bat boy as we went into the second half of the season. On Labor Day, the Tigers split a doubleheader with Oakland, and their record was now 87-52. My brother Bill started high school, and I entered the 8th grade. The Tigers posted their 90th win of the season on Friday, September 6th, in front of 42,269 fans, standing room only, at Tiger Stadium in downtown Detroit. Summer turned into fall, and the World Series was in sight for the Tigers. The last game of the regular season was played on September 29th, and the Tigers are the American League champions with a record of 103 wins and 59 losses. Denny McLain ends the season with a record of 31-6. No pitcher has won 30 or more games in a season since then, and I never did get selected to be a bat boy. The Tigers faced the St. Louis Cardinals of the National League in the 1968 World Series. After losing 3 of the 4 first games, the series moved back to Detroit for Game 5. The Tigers have had many amazing comebacks during the regular season, but can they pull off the biggest one ever? St. Louis needs just one more win, while Detroit has to win all 3 remaining games, including Game 7 in St. Louis. Then the Tigers won Game 5 by a score of 5-3 and destroyed the Cardinals in Game 6, 13-1, with 10 runs scored in the 3rd inning. Now this series goes back to St. Louis for the tie-breaking game. Bob Gibson is pitching for the Cardinals. Mickey Lolich, who has already pitched 2 complete games in the series, is on the mound for Detroit. The game was scoreless through the first 6 innings, and as the school day ended, I headed home. Walking down Woodward Avenue, I passed by Sears. Going as slowly as I possibly could, in every window there was a television with the game on. I was watching the game. The Tigers came up to bat in the top of the 7th. The Tigers break through on a triple by Jim Northrup that goes over center fielder Kurt Flood's head, driving in Norm Cash and Willie Horton. Continuing down Woodward Avenue more quickly, I paused once again in front of SS Kresge's to watch the 8th inning. The Tigers were now going into the top of the 9th. I'm pretty sure that I ran the last half mile home, and as I was on my way, people started honking their horns and flashing their headlights in celebration of the win. The Tigers win Game 7 by a score of 4-1. The headline in that day's extra edition of the Detroit Free Press read, "We win." The headline told the story. Amidst all the turmoil, the people of Detroit came together behind their baseball team. Joe Falls, Detroit's senior baseball writer, described the impact the Tigers championship had on the city. My town, as you know, had the worst riot in our nation's history in the summer of 1967, and it left scars which may never heal. And so as 1968 dawned and we all started thinking ahead to the hot summer nights in Detroit, the mood of our city was taut. It was apprehensive. But then something started happening in the middle of 1968. You could pull up to a light on the corner of Claremont and 12th, which was the hub of last year's riot, and the guy in the next car would have his radio turned up. "McLean looks in for the sign. He's set. Here's the pitch." It was a year when an entire community, an entire city was caught up in a wild, wonderful frenzy. Finally home, I ran upstairs to get my Detroit Tigers pennant off the wall, then quickly down again to hop into the family station wagon with my mom and 3 oldest siblings so that we too could drive up and down Woodward Avenue, honking the horn, waving our pennants, and screaming at the top of our voices. We joined our neighbors in celebration of an amazing end to an amazing season.
Come on, even if you don't like Detroit, put your hands together for James Gone. One more time for James Gone. I thought, aha, when watching the grandchildren praying in Nebraska. Friends, your next storyteller is Patricia Winters. She is the pastor of Sun City Christian Church. I'm sorry. Oh, you remember? Sorry. It's my no offense to the pastor of Sun City Christian Church. That's completely Yvonne Gilmore's fault. She is a member. That's what she told me. She didn't say otherwise. She's a member of Sun City Christian Church. And in fact, she was born on a helicopter. Put your hands together for Patricia Winters.
Well, thank you. Now, I don't know if your grandma had this sort of table, but mine did. You know, the kind of table that only got used at Christmas or Easter, the kind with upholstered chairs and a 1/2-inch thick felt cover for protection. It was the kind of table that sat empty with only a china cabinet full of desert rose dishes to keep it company more days than not. Anyway, my grandma had that sort of table, the sort of table that only got used on Christmas and Easter. It sat 8 people comfortably without the inserts, 9 if us kids wanted to squeeze, which worked out great for us because when we all showed up at the same time for holiday festivities, we were just right. All 4 cousins squeezed on one side, my grandmother sat at the head of the table, and our parents scattered around to keep an eye on us. At Christmas and Easter, it was my job as the oldest grandchild by about 10 years to set this table, which meant pulling out those desert rose dishes, which, like the table, only got used twice a year. Now, if you have ever set a table like that, then you know. First down was the lace tablecloth, still in its dry cleaning plastic from the holiday before. In the middle of the table sat whatever delightful centerpiece had been most recently designed by one of the younger grandchildren, usually something of the traced hand, turkey, or toilet paper tube variety. Then there's the dinner plates and the salad plates, the bread plates and the dessert plates. You've got the water goblets and the drink glasses and the dainty coffee cups, even though Grandma was the only one who drank the stuff. You've got the gravy boat and the bread basket waiting for those sacred Christmas and Easter rolls, the butter dishes and the salt and pepper shakers in the shape of tiny roses. And then you had the silverware, all 18,000 pieces of it, brought out ceremoniously from their velvet bedding. Big forks and medium-sized spoons, knives of the sharp and butter variety, tiny forks meant for salad, and wee spoons set aside for aforementioned coffee. Only it never failed that as soon as that last napkin was placed dutifully at its station, my great Aunt Bertha would show up. We should have known, but never did. She lived a few houses down from my grandmother, and she had an open invitation. God love that woman. I never knew a day that my great Aunt Bertha was dressed in anything other than a house coat with knee-high hose that had fallen to her ankles before she even made it out the front door. She would envelop me in a squishy hug and release me, only to pick up my cheek between her two calloused fingers and go slip, slip, slip as her usual greeting. I blame her to this day for my chubby cheeks. Her presence, of course, meant setting another place at this table, which meant shifting dinner plates and salad plates, bread plates and dessert plates, water goblets and drink glasses and dainty coffee cups, even though Grandma was the only one who drank the stuff. It meant pulling out more forks and knives and tiny spoons and squeezing one of the extra chairs on the adult side of the table. And I swear every time I got that final napkin placed, the doorbell would ring. And in would walk one or two of Grandma's widowed brothers from across town, one missing a foot from the war and the other two fingers. They were a mystery to me when I was young. As a child, I wondered, how would one go about buying shoes? Do you buy the whole pair? And what about gloves? But I never had the nerve to ask, and I wish I had. Of course, their presence meant pulling out the table leaf. It meant clearing each dinner plate and salad plate, water goblet, and all 18,000 pieces of silverware off of the table. It meant stretching that beautiful lace tablecloth to the very edges of the walnut and doing the whole thing over again. If your grandmother has that sort of table, then you know. There's the dinner plates and the salad plates, the bread plates and the dessert plates, the water goblets and the drink glasses and the dainty coffee cups, even though Grandma was the only one who drank the stuff. You've got the gravy boat and the bread basket waiting for sacredness and all 18,000 pieces of silverware. And about the time the construction paper and toilet roll centerpiece was being placed again, the doorbell would ring. My grandmother was a special education teacher for 60 years, and when the adult day center in town was closed for the holiday, a handful of her old kids would stop by for a meal. Soon behind them would come one of Aunt Bertha's foster kids, Jerry, who lived in a van in the park in the big city down the road, and he always came bearing a loaf of white bread and a tub of best choice margarine. But he had almost always needed a bath. So while I was stripping the table, while the turkey baked and the cranberry sauce congealed and those blessed yeasty rolls rose, my grandmother would usher Jerry back to the bathroom, get him set up, throw his clothes in the wash, and find him something else to wear. And I would begin to set that table, you know the kind of table that only gets used at Christmas and Easter. Another table leaf would be added and a tablecloth thrown over the exposed, unprotected wood, only now it didn't even come close to covering the ends. Dinner plate and salad plate sets were split up, and bread plates and became dessert plates. An 84-ounce thermos that wasn't not to be parted with replaced several drinking glasses, and the hand-drawn turkey and toilet roll centerpiece was discarded. 18,000 pieces of silverware were rearranged, and dainty coffee cups were put back in the china cabinet, since Grandma really was the only one who drank the stuff. Metal folding chairs were brought in from the garage, a stool carried in from the laundry room, and a footrest from the living room, which two of us grandkids were forced to share. And when the food came, the bodies were squished in, the tenor of the room transformed to life. My Aunt Bertha telling tales of grown tomatoes the size of her head that fed the family for days. Jerry regaling us with stories of home like I had never known. Brothers sharing memories of war and peace. Special needs kids laughing loudly and making funny faces with us grandkids who reached again and again for more turkey and congealed cranberry sauce and slice after slice of white bread with store-bought margarine until we were sure that we would never eat again. And when the napkins were lifted in surrender and the last of the forks turned over in defeat, a sigh would fill the room. Content, joyful, rested, and exhausted at the same time. Then someone would slap their knee and say, "Welp," which, if you're from the Midwest, serves as the universal sign of departure. And one by one, unexpected folks would make their way to the door, clutching foil-wrapped rolls in one arm and letting hugs last a little longer than normal in the other. Dishwashers would be packed to the brim, 18,000 pieces of silverware hand-washed and finding respite once more in their velvet box. The lace tablecloth would be bagged for the dry cleaner in the morning. And when each task was completed, each of those family members would retreat, donning their PJs to settle into whatever the night might hold, usually bed for the littlest ones and a shared nightcap for the siblings and spouses out back. But as the oldest grandchild by 10 years, and now taskless, I always sort of found myself wandering the quiet house with its dimmed lights and pockets of sacred smells throughout, not sure what was left after a full day of chatter and clinking and finding and moving. So I would wander. And it would be in this wandering that I would find my grandmother sitting peacefully, quietly, breathlessly, at the kind of table that only gets used at Christmas and Easter, drinking her decaf out of a dainty Desert Rose coffee mug, since she was the only one who drank this stuff. I don't know if your grandma had this sort of table, the sort of table that could make room for whoever walked through the door and make space for their story. The sort of table that could house fine china and 84-ounce thermoses, turn store-bought white bread into something holy, and help folks who were alone feel less so. The sort of table that could feed your belly and your spirit, your heart, and your perception of the way the world was supposed to work all at the same time. Yeah, I don't know if your grandma had that sort of table, but mine did.
Patricia Winters. Your next storyteller is a member of Comunidad Limon. He's actually been to all 50 of the United States. And he's also your regional minister. Put your hands together for the Reverend Dr. J. Hardley.
I went to a college where we joked that there were three kinds of majors: pre-law, pre-med, and pre-rich. One of my classmates' father was the president of the New York Stock Exchange, the president of Wall Street. Another's father owned the New York Yankees. And then there was a girl whose father was the king of Jordan. Now, me, I was the son of a disciples minister. And maybe that skewed my perspective a little bit. But at that college, I thought of myself as poor. Everywhere I looked, I was surrounded by wealth. Now, the week after my college graduation, I boarded a plane and I flew down to Honduras to visit my brother, who was serving for 3 years as a global mission intern. As soon as I got through customs and I walked outside, I was swarmed by children in tattered clothing, begging for help. My brother didn't quite part the Red Sea, but he managed to usher me through the crowd to an old Jeep and somehow maneuvered his way through all the children, the traffic, the bumpy dirt roads to the house that he was renting. All along the way, I saw throngs of hungry children, broken cars, and shacks made of tin cans and palm branches. Everywhere I looked, I was surrounded by poverty. After we dropped my things off at the house, I said, I am starving. I'm going to die if I don't get something to eat soon. So we walked down the street to an outdoor chicken stand. It's kind of the Honduran version of a taco truck without the truck and without the tacos. The man had several chickens roasting on a spit, and there were stools around a couple of tables. My brother ordered 2 canastas de pollo, and the man took out his machete and he hacked off part of the roasting chicken. He put it in a basket with French fries, and he handed us our dinner. I was so hungry, I gobbled it right up. I ate every last bit of chicken you could get off that bone, leaving only just a little bit of gristle and skin. Just as I finished, I felt a tug on my shirt. And I turn and I look, and there's 2 little boys saying something quickly and pointing. Now, I didn't understand their words, but the meaning was obvious. They were hungry, and they wanted food. I felt bad because I'd eaten it all. Lo siento, I said. I'm sorry, I already ate it all. I don't have anything left to give you. I lowered my basket down to show them that the chicken was all gone. Faster than I could believe, they thrust their hands into the basket, grabbed the bones, devoured the fat and the gristle that I had left, dropped completely bare bones in the basket, and ran off. Gracias, they called as they ran away, chased by the cook and his machete. I'm sorry those street urchins bothered you, the cook said to me. I was just sitting there thinking about how I had just told my brother I was dying of starvation. I looked up at him, and he said simply, that was their dinner tonight, more than they get some nights. Spend a few days in Central America, and it doesn't take long to realize why people are coming to the United States in search of a better life for their children. Everywhere I looked, I was surrounded by poverty. On my 5th day in Honduras, my brother said, tonight I'm going to come after work and I'm going to pick you up and we're going to go to Ninfa's church. Ninfa being my brother's fiance. Great, I thought. Church is boring enough in English. I can't wait to sit through a service in Spanish. Now, I was 22 years old at the time, and I had had a wonderful upbringing at First Christian Church of Mesa, Arizona. It was beautiful. I loved the preacher. It was inspiring. I was well loved. But after we moved to Kansas when I was in high school, let's just say my new preacher was not stimulating the interest of my teenage self. Nor was the music, nor the people who seemed to think that teenagers didn't really belong in church anyway. I started saying things like, church people are more interested in making themselves comfortable than in following Jesus, or caring for the poor, or serving their neighbor. Oh, yes, I was a very judgmental young man. I thought I knew it all. So when I moved to a boarding school in Michigan and then went to college in Massachusetts, I pretty much stopped going to church altogether, and truthfully, I thought I would never go again. Thursday night, Ninfa's church met up on a roof on a house in Tegucigalpa. They're almost all young adults. I don't think there was anybody over 35 there that night. They lit a campfire in a little pit on the roof. And there was life and energy and enthusiasm. They started singing with passion. But the thing that amazed me the most is that they kept thanking God for their blessings. Gracias, bendito Señor, por todas nuestras bendiciones. Gracias por todo nos has dado. There was sincere, enthusiastic gratitude, thanking God for all that God had done for them, for all that God had given them. I was sitting there thinking, what are you doing? God hasn't given you anything. And yet, everywhere I looked, I was surrounded by gratitude. They say that cognitive dissonance can change your life. They're right. After 4 years of being surrounded by wealth and thinking of how little I had, then after 4 days of being surrounded by poverty, thinking of how little they had, and then after 4 minutes of being surrounded by gratitude and realizing how ungrateful I was, how entitled I was, how clueless I was. I was so full of cognitive dissonance that my whole world started to shift. I started to see differently. And that was the beginning of my journey back to church. I'm afraid that sometimes, and way more often than I would like to admit, my old sense of entitlement creeps back in. Original sin is hard to escape. Before I can stop them, the words, "I'm starving," just pop out of my mouth. But sometimes, on a good day, I see with those new eyes, and everywhere I look, I am surrounded by blessings.
True stories change lives. Jay Hartley, one more time. I thought, aha, when I saw the moon rise over the Pacific Ocean. And I said, look at God. Your next storyteller is a member of Casa del Adoracion. She loves dogs. And she says she has more dog friends than people friends. Let's encourage her tonight. Our storyteller is Brianna Cruz.
I wish my abuelita would love me, like other abuelas love their grandkids. I was about 8 years of age. My brother was 6. When my parents would drop my brother and me every morning at my abuela's house, and then they would head out to work. Every day for the next 4 years, 4 o'clock in the morning. And every day I wished my abuela liked me, and I hoped I could hug her. But it would be like hugging a big fuzzy saguaro. I was so afraid of her. She could be a mean person, and she didn't love me. I couldn't understand why. Why did she hit me with such anger? Why would she say to me how hated I was and how that I was a mistake? I just wanted to have an abuelita that loves me. Years passed, and I started a family of my own. Every time we would go visit my abuelita, I loved to see how she was playful and kind to my kids. Well, she still would get frustrated with the kids. As far as our relationship, well, I respected her, but we were not close. One day, my abuela was not feeling well. She wasn't feeling like herself, so she went to the doctor to go get checked. The doctor ordered some tests, and then some days went by. The entire family was like every day after work, we would all gather at my abuelita's house, just to eat and just to talk. And then the phone rang. My uncle picked up the phone. By the look of his face, it was not good. He was looking down as everybody else looked and noticed him. We all stayed quiet. And he just said, "Mom, you have Alzheimer's." But, she kind of seemed okay. Time went by, and one day my abuela got so sick that she had to stay in bed, something that she really didn't like to do. And we were taking turns on taking care of her. Alzheimer's was starting to take my abuelita away. So she was asleep. All she would do was just sleep. I sat by her bedside. I was reading a book, and then I just felt something holding my hand. She looked at me and said, "I'm sorry, and I love you." I couldn't believe what I was hearing for the first time. I couldn't believe it. I said, "Abuelita, I love you. Te quiero. Te quiero mucho, abuelita." And then she said, "What are you reading?" I was reading my Bible. She said, "Read." And I read. And I asked her, "Abuelita, can I pray for you?" And she nodded, yes. We prayed. She accepted Christ. On one of the very few days that she was on her five senses, that she actually knew what was going on. I was so happy. We held hands, we prayed, cried, and hugged so tight. My abuelita hugged me. She hugged me, and she loves me. That's all I could think of. Weeks later, my abuelo called and said, "Abuela's not home. We can't find her." I was so scared. She had gone for a walk, and some way she lost her way back. She wandered around our neighborhood in South Phoenix where we lived. Not a pleasant place back then. Fortunately, a neighbor spotted her and called us. When my abuelo picked her up, she didn't recognize the guy. And she started to get kind of aggressive with him. So we knew how to get to her. He just said, "Your dad sent me over to pick you up." Her face lit up with a smile. Okay, she got in the truck and headed home. Years passed by, and my abuelita didn't recognize anyone. For some reason, she would mistake us for family members that had already passed long time. She would call me Nena, my mom's name, and I would just go with it. And then she would say, "Nena, who are these little kids here?" And I would just smile and be like, "They're your grandkids." She looked. She thought she was a teenager. She would smile. She loved to dance with us in her living room to rancheras and norteñas. She would also sing songs like El Corrido de Namiquipa, a song that narrates the beauty of her hometown and how it was when she was growing up, how the river would just cross the town and how everybody would just gaze at it and enjoy the green fields that we would see around. the summers, amazing summers. Shocking to us, she could sing that song and not forget one word, but then she didn't know who we were. But she would dance like a child in every family party. She would just smile and have fun. I really loved spending time with her. Of course, you always have those people who say, God is punishing her for being such a mean person. But no, I'd see it different. I see it as a blessing. She was like a child. She loved, she smiled, she lived her last years with such joy and peace, confident that she was taken care of. She no longer had to worry about anything or anyone. To me, that was a gift. It was a blessing. I did ask myself, why was she a mean person? Curiosity. I didn't know her story, but once I heard her story, the hardship she encountered as a young mother of 12 in a small town in Mexico and living in such poverty where she would ask the neighbors to borrow their fridge to store the milk. She went through betrayal. She was a survivor, a strong and brave woman. I now understand her. And with this, I love her even more. Alzheimer's gave me my abuelita, the abuelita I had always dreamed of. I now have my abuelita. Hola, abuelita. I miss your smile and laughter. I miss your hugs. I miss your voice. I miss your beautiful silver curls. I wish we had more time. I wish I had one more hug. As I stand here at Greenwood Cemetery before a stone with her name and this beautiful poem that my uncle wrote for her. Such a loving story from her. I could just say, see you soon, abuelita. As I walk away, I can only thank God for giving me my abuelita, the abuelita I had always dreamed of.
Church is where we tell the truth, and true stories save lives. One more time for Brianna Cruz. We're telling stories of eureka, aha moments, stories of seeing the light. Friends, our next storyteller, and you just have two more, is Rachel Majors. She is a member of First Christian Church of Mesa, and she loves softball. I mean, really loves softball. She says she's obsessed with it. That's a word she used. So much so, she might even play it after this if we don't go too late. Put your hands together for Rachel.
Picture this. It's the early 1990s in a Sunday school classroom in First Christian Church of Mesa, Disciples of Christ. I'm in a double-layered dress with ruffles, lace, white tights, shiny dress shoes, and wavy hair with double bangs. All of us kids are sitting on the floor, singing songs, learning about the Bible. I follow what the teacher and other kids are doing, and we say, here is the church, and here is the steeple. Open the doors and see all the people. We would wiggle and giggle with all of our fingers going everywhere. Then it was on to the next song or lesson. This is a place where I feel safe and accepted. I feel a part of and loved no matter what. This continues in my childhood within worship services, baptism, youth group, retreats, and church camp every year. Fast forward, I'm 26 years old, sitting in a padded chair in a rehab facility called the River Source in downtown Mesa, Arizona. The Serenity Prayer and 12 steps are posted on the wall. I'm surrounded by people of all ages who are sharing about certain aspects of their lives of addiction and what brought them to where they are and how they feel at that very moment. I can relate to pretty much everything and all of the feelings that are being shared. As I sit there, I begin to think about where I was, all the events and substances that helped me to get to this place in my life, how I never could have imagined how broken, lonely, and empty I would feel inside. I remember waking up in my apartment that I was about to get evicted from only about a week before this and feeling deep down in my soul that it would be easier to die, but I was too scared to die, and I didn't want to die, so I went back to sleep. I hated who I was at that moment. I hated who I had become, and I was ashamed. Gosh, I never want to feel that way ever again. The Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous on page 8 says, "No words can tell of the loneliness and despair I found in the bitter morass of self-pity. Quicksand stretched around me in all directions. I had met my match. I had been overwhelmed. Alcohol was my master." I can absolutely relate to those words written so long ago and feel them within, just like when the thought crossed my mind that dying would be easier than living. But why, God? Why do I feel these things? What makes me feel them? Why can't I get them to go away? I try to figure out in my broken mind why. I start to doodle on my notepad just to get the thoughts out and try to slow my mind. I suddenly had a moment of clarity where I thought, I don't have to hold those imperfections over my own head anymore. And I can stop beating myself up. These beautiful people have worked through some of their darkest and deepest secrets. Why can't I? They have a program, and with the help of my sponsor and the others in the program, they can help me work through my struggles and grief of my grandma passing away, my perception of my family falling apart, and my feeling of being alone. They really give me hope, and they have real smiles on their faces. Just like when I was at church all those years ago, I trust that I am exactly where I'm supposed to be at this moment, and that God has a bigger plan for me. In that moment, I feel those statements deep in my soul, and I start to smile. I feel the weight lift just a little bit so that I could breathe a little easier. God was doing for me what I could not do for myself. And that brought me so much hope that life, as I was now trying to live it, would get better. I didn't have to go back to my old broken ways of doing things. With God's help, I could choose to do better and be better. After completing 30 days of inpatient treatment, I went back to church with my dad. Sitting in the pews always brings back so many memories. Memories of sitting with my whole family in the rows. I always remember sitting in the pew all cuddled up next to my Grandma Betty singing the old rugged cross. Singing in the children's and adults choirs, sleeping on the floor during youth retreats, being baptized, and so many youth Sundays. Then there were the later memories, the ones where I would come to church after partying too late the night before. You know, I don't have many memories of feeling judged or unloved at church. I remember when I showed up late to my Grandma Betty's memorial when I was in the middle of my addiction. I slipped in on the side, and I sat in the front pew with my family. I remember bawling my eyes out, and all of the church members and my family giving me hugs after, squeezing me tight and telling me they loved me and missed me. On that first Sunday back, after I had been gone for a couple years, I remember hearing one of the praise band songs and my dad and I both tearing up and hugging each other. This was the most hope and joy we had felt for the first time in a long while. Just like when I was growing up, this church gave me hope that God will do for me what I can't do for myself, and they will always love me through my journey. Fast forward through the next 12 years of staying sober and experiencing emotional sobriety. Also, during those 12 years, I've been able to reconnect with my church family and rebuild relationships. I go back to church camp a couple times as a counselor. I was an elder, just like my grandpa, my mom, and my dad were. I started a young adult group called the Not So Youth Group that lasted about a summer. I got to fill my soul by singing in the band and saying yes to being worship leader whenever asked. I've also served as vice moderator and now moderator of FCC Mesa, just like my dad and mom did. But the church is different now. We've all been through a pandemic. There's not as many Sunday school rooms being used. We don't have a nursery attendant. We've had some weddings, but it's mostly memorial services recently. When praying and meditating, I find myself wondering, why, God? What do we need to do to be your church and reach your word to the people who need it? Here is the church. Here is the steeple. Open the doors. Wow, we are really hurting, stretched thin, and it feels similar to being broken and empty, similar to the broken and empty feeling I had in rehab. But at the same time, we also have so much passion towards our mission and vision in our hearts. I want to be able to take action to do God's work. And we just have to discern what God would like us to take action on. In our Lenten study this year, we met in a small group after worship to discern together. While discerning the scripture and how it relates to the future of the church, a wise and beautiful member of our congregation suggests that it is a transition, not an end. No matter what decision we make, the legacy of FCC Mesa does not ever have to end. It can live on through the members and the gifts that we have to give throughout the community, just like Jesus lives in us. We are the church. The church is the people. Suddenly, the thought crosses my mind, we don't have to be in a building to be a church or to live out our values or mission. We can do that anywhere. And it doesn't have to look like it always has looked. It can change. Even though change is hard, I've changed a lot over the last 12 years. Change is inevitable in life. I am once again willing to embrace the change and this transition to see what God has planned for us as a church community. It reminds me of that great quote that says, "All that is gold does not glitter. Not all those who wander are lost." Embracing the transition and truly trusting God, I feel the weight lift a little and know that we are exactly where we are supposed to be at this moment. That God is doing for us what we cannot do for ourselves.
Rachel Majors. Church is where we tell the truth, and true stories change lives. Friends, our final storyteller of the night is a member of Casa del Adoracion. In fact, he has 14 grandchildren. Can you believe it? Put your hands together for Reverend Martin Tapia.
Jorge got up from his seat. He began to share his story, and I was surprised by now how he's developed the story. Each word pierced my spirit and heart like a knife. I listened attentively, waiting for him to finish. However, let's go back to a few weeks earlier when I was a mentor at Bethany West Fellows. Our team leaders and I were planning a cross-border trip to Tijuana, Mexico, for a meaningful experience with the local pastors. As a Spanish speaker in the leadership, I decided to preach at the end of our time together as we gather for fellowship with the people at the center we would be visiting. I knew, I feel it. Crossing that border would feel a surge of emotions inside me that I couldn't articulate at the time. But I did not want to make things uncomfortable for anyone. Therefore, I pushed through just I had done many times. We crossed the border into Tijuana in the morning. I couldn't help but think of all the times Lori missed this trip. Jesus. My wife was also a mentor and would have been there, but commitment sent her elsewhere and me. Well, I had to have this experience, I figured. After driving for about 15 minutes, we arrived at the center. We were greeted with warm embraces and beautiful hospitality. During the tour and the storytelling of the center work, I could hear the people's voices and interact with them. However, I was also aware of the internal experience I was having. I could feel the tension building on my shoulders as if I carrying a bag of bricks on my head was pounding. I was present, but I knew I wasn't entirely present. I was scanning every space, my eyes moving through every room to know my surroundings, and catching myself doing this, but I couldn't control it. As the day progressed, I began to feel less tension, less and less tension. During the day, I tried to engage with people around me and be more mindful of the present moment. As the day ended, we convened in a room and had the opportunity to hear from some residents, from some people who was in the space. They share their personal experience, and we attentively listened. The last person to share was Jorge. He began to share his life as a sicario in the Mexican drug cartel. The sicarios were responsible for violent portion of the business. They were assassins, the kidnappers, and the collectors. As he continued sharing, my heart was pounding, and I felt like it will jump out of my chest. I kidnap people, he said, separated from their families. Some never made it home. Jorge continued to share his story about encountering Jesus and how it transformed his life. Through his narrative, he revealed his struggles with making positive changes and how succeed. He shared his shame for what he has done and felt he could never be forgiven. even through everyone keep telling him that God has already forgiven him. He was a different man, but his past haunted him, and I could see this in his face. Jorge's words penetrated my spirit, and I couldn't feel the fire in my soul. Jorge thanked everyone for listening and sat down in the back row. Jorge sat down, and I sat silently, almost stuck to my chair momentarily. When Bellbaum looked over at me, smiled, and nodded at me, I stood up and looked around the room. I knew she saw me at that moment and she understood. But she encountered me to get up with a smile and nod. One of those nods reminds you that you are not alone. I placed my iPad on the stand and paused for a moment. Stepping forward, I noticed all eyes were on me. It felt like time had come to a standstill in that instant. I had a sermon to deliver on my iPad, but I decided to take a few more steps forward and stop in front of Jorge. I kneel before him, and I noticed how he became tense, just like I had earlier. I was one of those people who was kidnapped. I looked at him in the eyes and I said, he looked away as if confused and confronted, but I did not move. I said, Jorge, I forgive you. He turned and looked at me. He hugged me and I hugged him. We cried as true we were both being cleansed with every tear. About 10 years before that day, I had been kidnapped for 10 days. I had been separated from my family and held captivity. I was one of the lucky ones who made it home by the grace of God. Jorge and I both needed something that day. It was something that no one else in that space could give it us. We have a divine appointment together that day for the healing and reconciliation with self and God. We both understood what had happening and thanked God in that embrace. But like Jorge needed forgiveness from the victims, I realized I also need to forgive those who had been kidnapped me. We both had some words to whisper in the other's ear as we were speaking to those who needed to hear them and to God directly. But nobody else heard them. It wasn't necessary. It wasn't necessary. As I took a few steps back from Jorge, the room was silent. Everyone had disappeared into space to allow for this moment without interruption. They froze and prayed, and they all began to praise God. It was just enough that he helped me gain calm and get back to deliver the message God has placed it on my heart. I will never forget that cross-border experience. And I left something there that day that I not longer needed to carry. Now I understand God's grace had visited me, and for that, thanks be to the Lord.
Thank you. Martin Tapia, one more time. True stories change lives. True stories save lives. Thank you all for your participation. Will you join me? Will you stand in thanking all of our incredible storytellers for tonight? Doug Bland, Lucretia Free, James Gaughan Sr., Patricia Winters, Jay Hartley, Brianna Cruz, and Martin Tapia. So I asked you to lose your mind, right, and go crazy when they're in front of the microphone. Somebody said, oh, could we do this on Sunday? I just want to leave you with, you can, right? God loves us that much. God loves us that much. Thank you for participating, for being present wholeheartedly in this portion as we begin the Church Narrative Project this evening. We're going to transition and take a break for 5 minutes and come on back. If you joined us live online tonight across the U.S. and Canada, thank you so much. Also, I need to tell you, unfortunately, our GMP was actually delayed in an airport. But look at God, she got to listen to each of you because she was stranded and delayed in an airport. So we're grateful and love you, Terri. So let's take a break, 5 minutes, friends, and then we're going to come back and Terri on to our next session as we begin our Transformative Community Conference.